Okay, so our final presentation for the day before we do the big draw for the door prize is a presentation on the bats of Georgian Bay. We have two presenters, Stephen Kell. Stephen did his Bachelor of Science at the University of Guelph and his Master of Science at Laurentian, and for the last 4 years has been working out of Shawnee First Nation near Parry Sound. The other speaker is Derek Morningstar. Of course, Derek is the Vice Chair of the Organizing Committee of the Ontario Bat Network. He's the owner of MyodaStar, and he did his Master's with Dr. Brock Fenton. Gentlemen.
Thanks. And bear with us as Derek and I tag team this presentation. So, ooh, not that. Okay, yeah, so Shawanaga, we've been doing a bunch of different species at risk work, really focused around reptiles, and then in recent years going on to some other things, one of those things being bats. And just personally, but also within our team, we've just really grown to really love bats and want to continue the work, and so we've been doing multiple different studies, working with multiple different partners. But really, we're at least for myself and the rest of the team, we're still fairly new to bats, and that's why we work with this guy over here who knows his stuff. And so we've been working with Derek for about 4 years now through most of our bat work. And as we've been working through the bat projects at Shawanaga, we started looking at all of our local bat data and bat species in Shawanaga, and we want to continue to expand that. We have a poster on some of the other work that we're doing. And then we started to want to look at a little bit more regionally what our bats are doing. And we were very interested in how they're maybe moving up the coastline using the outer islands. And so we were thinking maybe we focus a bit on that. And then Derek and I were like, oh, well, why don't, instead of just focusing on the eastern Georgian Bay coastline, why don't we focus on all of Georgian Bay entirely and try to go at an even bigger regional scale. And so this project came to be Apakwaanajinh, Mnidoo, Gamii, which means essentially in Ojibwe, bats of Georgian Bay. And as we know, there's a lot of knowledge gaps with bats, a lot of knowledge gaps around Georgian Bay as well, for all the species and for a lot of those critical habitats. And there's really no better place to study those bats than within First Nations lands. A lot of First Nations lands are sort of a lot of the most diverse and least touched lands left around. So a really good place to start. And so for this project, we were actually able to have 9 First Nations all come on board, 6 in the first year of the project, which we're presenting on today, and then 3 more recently for the years 2 and 3. And so for the scope of this project, we really want to have a big community engagement in that. So for all the participating First Nations, having public nights, nights where individuals can come out, community members can come out, engage with those bats, see them up close and personal, sort of get over some of the fears that are associated with bats. We're trying to increase capacity within First Nations, within the lands staff, and within First Nations members. Every First Nation's different in their capacity, especially lands departments. Some have them, like Shawanaga, and some don't have any sort of lands department at all yet. So trying to increase that capacity for this type of research and monitoring, and then be able to continue on after this project's done. And the type of data that we're collecting is acoustics, netting, and then tracking both at local and regional scale through MODIS network, as well as handheld tracking, and then incorporation of TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. And I just wanted to put in just a quick statement about community consultation. Always trying to go for that golden standard of community consultation. We tried to do the best we could. With funding, it's always really hard. You never know when it's going to come in, what's going to be available. We tried to reach out about half a year prior to all these communities to sort of start building all those relationships before the project was even announced, before we even knew we had funding. We were reaching out, building those relationships. And then once we did know that the grant was funded, it's a lot easier to go in and start working with each of those communities, sort of on an individual basis, but also as a collective.
Okay, so we're actually going to slide over because we're not in the screen. So we've done this presentation a couple times, and we have a little bit of information about bats in Ontario. All of you know this stuff. So of course, there's 8 species that we know of in Ontario. 4 species are listed. Another 3 probably next month are going to get listed by Kasiwik. But when you go into a First Nation or any area where there's no information, listed or not, they're interested in all species. So we didn't just drill down on the few SAR that we could find, and we were interested in all species, where they went, what they did, and learning more about them. So I'm not going to get too much more biology stuff. All you know that. So we're going to talk about each of the communities that we visited and some of the success that we had. So we did netting nights at all these communities. The first one was at Wasauksing, where we did 4 nights, and we caught 83 bats in 4 nights. That is mostly because we had a nice roost in a house that we could catch a lot of them from. On the public night, we had 75 of them. That was kind of crazy. It was all little browns at that, and then we caught some big browns as well in a few places. That community has a lot of dark closed forests, so there's some really interesting spots where you can go and try to catch bats. But it is an island, so it's hard to get to some of those places. I'll just keep clicking.
Yeah, so for the tracking, we're going to go over pretty quickly for each community, not go into really any details too specifically, but at each community, we're going out there, we're working with the community members, working with the land staff, teaching them those tracking skills, those monitoring skills, and identifying those roosts so that they're able to protect that habitat and know where those bats are going. So we were able to, in Wasauksing, find multiple houses that they're going to, presumed multiple maternity roosts, as well as multiple trees. Here we have a large tree with a huge cavity in it, where multiple individuals were going back and forth between a house and this tree roost.
Okay, I'm going to go backwards because I meant to talk about the picture right there. We get lots of other bycatch as well. That's a flying squirrel that jumped out of the mist net onto James's arm and decided to hang around on his shoulder, and then tucked itself into his hood and stuck around for a nice photo op. So we catch lots of other cool stuff too. I just forgot to mention that. It's fun. Okay, so we're back here. So the next one we went out to was Mnidoo. So we did 4 nights there as well. We didn't do quite as well. We only caught 3 bats. All of them were little browns, but we were able to track them. That area is a lot of rock bear, it's really open. It's not as dark. It's not as much closed forests, although some places we went to wetlands and forests. And we did it on the full moon, which was, in hindsight, not the time to do it. So bats are often ludophobic. They don't really like to come out as much in the full moon, and if they do, they can see your nets and they just laugh at you and keep on flying. So we'll be going back to Mnidoo to do something in a darker night, but that's the capture at that location.
Yeah, so all the tracking, no success in finding any bats in Mnidoo, but the bats that we did catch there, we did find across the river in a couple different buildings. And so what Mnidoo's going to do this summer is work with those landowners. One of them was actually a sort of resort that has just got new owners, and they're looking to possibly exclude the bats or do some sort of work with them. So Mnidoo's going to be doing some public outreach and working with those folks with those bat roosts. So while we didn't find any in Mnidoo, just outside, we found some, and they're going to be working with those landowners.
Okay, so next we went out to the Chippewas of Nawash, or Nea-Shinningaming community. We did 4 nights there, and we caught 79 bats. I'm going to run this video while I'm talking because it's a minute long. And we got 3 species there, including eastern small-footeds and little browns and some big browns. Public night was great. It was in a good public park. We had some good participation. This was a wild night of catching bats, and I'm going to explain it. So this is a church that's there where bats have been evicted, and there's a bat box right here, and we've put a harp trap in front of it. There's another bat box that didn't have any bats in it, but we looked at the forecast and it said might be a little bit of rain, so like, okay, we'll try, see what we can do. So we set it all up, and there's also triple high nets in both directions around this building, so there's a lot of nets around there and the trap. And there was, I think, 5 of us there at the time. And then the rain came in, and it wasn't just a little bit of rain, it was a complete downpour, like gushing down on us instantly with thunder and lightning, and I've got triple high poles in the air. So we quickly pulled all that down while getting covered in rain. Luckily I had a tent in which we could process, so this is processing bats in rapid fire. And we had, I think it was 67 bats in less than an hour, and most of them were in the harp trap. We had to pull that harp trap down. It was filling up with water and hopefully drained out, but they were all okay. and we processed those bats so fast, and they all flew away fine. It was good, but the weather report was wrong. Don't trust the weather report.
Yeah, so we had a lot of success in tracking in Cape Croker. A lot of different structures that the bats were using. That bat house on the old church where they had been evicted, a couple different farm properties, some old buildings, which we had learned at the time were going to be torn down soon. And so now the community is going to be working to work with those bats in there, make sure that structure doesn't come down without working with the bats. And then also some different tree roofs as well. So the tree here you can see way high above the canopy, getting a lot of sun exposure. But a lot of bats that we're tracking back to sites that are I don't know, a couple hundred meters easily from the netting locations, and getting them out flying over the bay at nighttime too while tracking.
Okay, so we went out to Whitefish River First Nation. That's a little bit north of Manitoulin Island. We did 5 nights there, and we didn't catch a huge number of bats. We only got 7 bats, but we had 4 species, so we had pretty good diversity out there, including eastern small-footed. Silver-haired's are kind of fun, totally different to be able to catch out there, getting migratory bats. So that was really cool, and when we're out catching bats, we also like to get release videos, so I'm going to play that while we're talking. But at these public nights, that's the greatest thing you can do. So when you've got a bat in the hand, everybody gets to look and take a picture when it's in your hand and you've got a glove on, that's fine. But if you do a slow-mo release where you hold it up and get a good light on it, everybody can get their phone out. They get a slow-mo release video like this and they can take it and show to everybody. It's a great public education thing to do when you're releasing bats.
Again, yeah, a lot of good success with the tracking here. A lot of different tree roofs, as well as with that eastern smallfoot. We had multiple different rock sites that it was going to, including just a big giant boulder that was right in front of the band office that it went back to multiple days in a row. So some really cool data with the eastern smallfoot.
All right, so we went to Moose Deer Point First Nations next, which is on the east side, it's kind of southeast. In 3 nights, we got 27 bats. We had a building roost to work at there again. And it was, again, mostly little browns and a few big browns, so we did pretty well. Unfortunately, at that time, we couldn't do a public night because there was a COVID outbreak within the community and we weren't allowed to do that. So we're going to go back and have a chance to do a public night with them because we want all the communities to have that opportunity for people to see and know what's going on. So.
Yeah, I think this was mostly housing roosts that we found, a couple different tree roosts, but again, a combination of both buildings and tree roofs that the bats are using.
And we're going to actually talk more about where we track them. This one's kind of interesting, but we'll get to it. Okay, so the last of the ones that we're going to talk about now is we went to Shawanagas within their traditional territory, the tunnels, which is what the poster was about, and this is when we went out to do some netting of them. This was in September, so of course it's later in the season. We're looking for swarming activity. These are right on tunnels that are more like kind of man-made caves underneath the railway. In the 2 nights, we caught 2 bats, an eastern small-footed and a little brown. We later found what we think was that eastern small-footed hibernating inside that tunnel. So, this was pretty great to be able to catch them there, even though we got kind of unfavorable weather. We got a bit of fog, and it was also a bright moon night, so it was too bright, and then it was too dark with the fog. So it was kind of challenging, but we still caught some bats.
Yeah, and we caught a blue-spotted salamander too, somehow, somehow in the trap. Yeah, so at Shawanaga, we had already focused a lot on our own roofs within the community, so we were trying to focus on these tunnels. Had not great success in picking up where this bat went. We got 1 signal, but not the actual location. So curious to talk to the others tracking eastern smallfoots about in the rocks. We were getting vague signals, but we weren't sure. Maybe it was underground in one of the tunnels or like up into a crack. Yeah, we couldn't pick up a definite location of it. The other one we just couldn't pick up off the transmitter at all. But then this leads us into the MODIS network, so we weren't able to pick it up by hand, but did get it picked up on MODIS. And then we're going to talk about just the cool results that we had with MODIS. You can just skip
Okay, we're going to skip this one because this is roosts we found within the Shawanaga First Nation, but there's lots more roosts there, same thing. So these are just some fun pictures of what the capture and tracking. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of great fun. Harp traps work awesome, and they work really good for different species like eastern small-footeds, so that's just pictures for fun. So then I'm going to talk about the MODIS network. So if you don't know about it, this is an international network of towers for picking up moving animals. So you put transmitters on them. It's the same transmitters that we track with locally. And this is the tower network in Ontario. And as you can see, there's a big gap on Manitoulin Island. There's no towers. Last year, we got these 3 towers installed, so there was nothing north of Manitoulin Island before that. So basically, if a bat flies within a kilometer or 2 of these towers, it would get picked up. So you get long-distance movements of bats, but you can't triangulate specific locations. So that's kind of how MODIS works, and the tower looks something like this. There's a few different versions. So we're working to kind of build on that too. We're going to be installing 2 or maybe even 3 towers on Manitoulin and maybe one at Christian Island this year. If we're lucky, we'll put one on the ferry that goes back and forth all day. It would be kind of cool. So when we're tracking on MODIS, it's long distance stuff. I'm going to get cut off here, but we're almost done. So we can see some really neat long. So this is a bat that was caught at Whitefish River, and later we picked it up down here, all the way across Georgian Bay. And that was a little brown myotis. Silver-haired bats, they usually go a long ways. This particular one, again, from Whitefish River, decided to come down to, this is Moose Deer Point area. So this is crossing over between the different First Nations we're working with. And then from Shawanaga, one of the tunnels coming down in this area. So we had some really interesting stuff with the MODIS, and these are just a few examples. We got 40 bats that had tags on them, so we have other examples where we can see long distance movements and start to understand what they're doing. And I'll go back to.
Sure. Yeah, so we had a knowledge sharing event with all those First Nations participating. Went really well. Next year we're hoping to have it in person. I think we're running out of time. We're super happy to welcome Michelle onto the project for years 2 and 3. She's up at the back there. Welcoming her to the bat world. She's going to be helping to incorporate a lot of that traditional ecological knowledge onto the project, so really excited to have that. And then next steps, so yeah, we have 3 new communities coming on this year, so we're going to be doing a lot of work there, and then revisiting a bunch of communities and some significant sites, visiting some caves. Yeah, and then Michelle's starting. You want to do importance?
Yeah, so just kind of what we're working on here is not just the biology. We're not just trying to find out what's going on with the bats, although you get lots of that information too. But it's allowing these communities to help and get the information themselves when they don't necessarily have the expertise or having done it before. So everything we do within every community is with them. We're not just going in and doing it ourselves. Of course, Stephen from Shawanaga, but then we're going to all these other communities, and we don't do anything without them with us, and as many of them as we can, right? So they get part of the funding goes to them to support their staff helping us, and we try to engage with as many people as we can. So it's really important to have that experience together, and that's something that's really gone really well. And then, of course, there's all kinds of information about the roosts that we've learned here. So, and that's where we end it. I know we're too long, but it's the last one of the day. So, all right, thank you. Do we have time for questions? Chris says we have time for 2 questions. Any questions? Why are bats lunar phobic? You should probably ask the bats. No, it's, well, obviously the most leading theory is that it's to do with predator avoidance. So, bats probably don't have a whole lot of predators in the night, maybe owls or something like that, but they still tend to avoid it. There's lots of other wildlife that's actually lunar phobic too on the ground, so I think that's a pretty common trend. But it's not, they're still out when the full moon's out and you pick them up on acoustics, but they also can see very well with regular old eyesight and they just avoid stuff. So they're out less and you catch them less. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it goes. Pardon me? Oh no, it's supported by all kinds of acoustics, and most bat biologists that go out and net bats avoid full moon nights on purpose. Like it's a thing. Yeah. And was there another question? James?
Curious, with the endangered bats, how was it received by the First Nation communities? Because then there's Species of Risk Act implications with endangered bat locations, and a lot of these are homes. So it's a different scenario than other lands of Ontario.
So I should have repeated the last question. It was why are bats lunophobic? And now James's question is the sensitivities around identifying locations of SAR on First Nations. Do you want that, or do you want me to do that one? Okay. That's a loaded question. So yes, these are endangered species. This is almost or usually on federal land, so the Endangered Species Act doesn't apply, but the Federal Species at Risk Act applies. So the rules are a little bit different. It's residences as opposed to habitat, different definitions, but it is still SAR habitat. But a big part of this is all these different nations are working towards self-governance. So they want to be able to manage the species on their own land, and they're being empowered to be able to do that. But to do that, they need to know a little bit more about these species. So this is allowing them to get that information and to understand how can they protect those species now that they know where the buildings are. What are they going to do about it? So it's more about them making their own decisions. I hope that answered it right. You think that was good? Yeah. Do we have one more question, or are we? Christy.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you can share with one thing that you may have learned from any of these communities that you worked with about bats or not about bats.
Your turn. Repeat the question.
Something that we learned from the communities about bats.
Or that
That's.
you learned from working with them.
I heard of a story about the creation of bats. I can't remember the specifics. I would like to call on Arden, my field technician back there. But yeah, I'm gonna get this wrong. Do you want to answer, Arden?
You're not on the spot at all.
Now I'm shaking. I don't know if I'm, the proper person to be sharing this story. This is something you'd want to get from an elder in the community themselves. But one of the interesting things I learned was the bat creation story, which was actually a squirrel who decided to save the sun, who was caught in a tree. And as the squirrel went to save the sun, he was burned black by the sun. He was also blinded by the sun. So the idea behind the story is that after the squirrel saved the sun granted the squirrel wings and incredible hearing to make up for the loss of his sacrifice. So that's kind of a bit of the indigenous storytelling for you. Wasn't expecting to do that, guys.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that and recognize that the elders are the best place to get the story. Encourage people to actually seek out that story.
Thank you, Arden.
I think that's it, right? Who's
That would be me, I guess.